Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope my audio is coming through okay. So it'd be good if you could give me a thumbs up with that. And welcome and thank you for joining us tonight here on Mimers Council. It's our first live stream here over on Mimers Council. People may know me, Phil Simpson, a little bit better from Mimers Brunner. This is our sister project. It's good, I'm getting the thumbs up in the chat there. This is our sister project from the same team as Mimers Brunner, where we are going to use this to talk more directly about politics, in particular nationalism, ethnic nationalism. Now, tonight's subject's going to be about coronavirus. Some of you may be wondering why coronavirus has anything to do with nationalism in general. But as we're going to discuss tonight and go through with a guest who I'll introduce very shortly, coronavirus has a potential, and I believe will change the world in many ways. Not even if you don't believe the virus is real, but like I said, we're going to go through all these subjects in detail, or as detailed as we can tonight. But it has the potential to change the way the world operates, let's put it that way. Change the way governments operate and maybe bring in laws that will restrict freedoms of speech and maybe even worse. So we're going to have a little breakdown here of that, because we have to remember that whilst in many cases nationalists do support strong governments, it is important that we understand that the governments at this time are, let's say, not exactly on our side, and are targeting and marginalising their ethnic minorities. Majorities, not their ethnic minorities, certainly not, but their ethnic majorities in the Western world, that is Europe, America and Australia. So I and my guests and I do believe that this is an important subject that needs covering. So without further ado, I will introduce my guest briefly, and probably why many of you are here is he's got a much bigger profile than me. And we'll just see his audio levels if they're coming through all right. So, racial consciousness, how are you doing tonight?
Hey everybody, how we doing? How's my audio coming through?
It's coming through good to me. Let's just see how about other people. In the chat would really help if we get a...
Yeah, guys in the chat, let me know how my audio is coming through. This is the first time I've ever done a live stream.
I'm just checking that. All good. I'll turn it up a little bit. No, sounds good. Everybody thinks it's fine. They're about balanced.
All right.
Well, that's great. So, you got anything to add to the disclaimer, or do you want to just get into the show?
You know, it's weird. I had a disclaimer all like prepared in my head, but of course, now that I want to give it, it's not ready. It's like all disappeared. No, just that I don't want anybody to assume that that I think I have some ability of analysis. I don't. But this is a really important subject, and Phil and I, we've been talking about it all week, and we just think it's worth talking from the perspective we're going to bring tonight. So we're not going to pretend to be experts on anything, but we just think this is a potentially world-changing event, and we want to look at it from as many different angles as we can, because we don't know how this is going to play out, but we kind of want to be prepared for whatever is going to come.
Indeed. And I got a bit, some people were saying that your audio was a bit low, so I have turned that up. Hopefully that's helped a little bit. And yeah, we like I say, we're no experts. We're just like you guys there at home. We're looking at this from all angles, and we are concerned about the future of our folk and our nations. And in looking at those things, we need to assess all things. And like I say, we will tonight be covering many options. We'll be looking at it from as many angles as possible. And also, we may even play devil's advocate here and there, just to pose some questions that maybe others aren't asking or whatever. But what I'm going to do tonight to start it off is, and I forgot to thank Racial Consciousness there for joining us tonight, as the nerves kicking a little bit on a live stream. But thanks for coming, mate, and we really do appreciate it. And racial conscious is someone who I consider a personal friend. I've got to know him very well over the last few months. And people ask who is speaking. It's quite easy to differentiate between us. I'm the English guy, that is Phil Simpson, and racial consciousness is the American.
I was gonna say Phil will have the cool English accent. I've got the dorky upper Midwest accent.
Yeah. And people say it's been truly amazing to watch all this unfold as regard coronavirus, I'm showing, and the way the world's reacting. And I agree, it's kind of surreal in many ways because some of the stuff on the street is seeming disproportionate to, our perceived, what we can perceive with our own five senses when we go out into the world. So, like I say, we're going to start the show quite simply by looking at some of the numbers. I do have a little slide here that will help us go through the numbers. There's only one slide, don't worry about it. It's not the greatest. Hopefully you guys can see that okay now. But what I want to do with this slide is just take a look at the virus from a perspective of, let's just look at the numbers first, because before we analyze the response to it or the changes it might make, we need to take a quick look at these, what it is. At least from an official standpoint. Now, obviously, there are people that may question the official story, and I don't blame them. We're going to try and look at that a little bit as well tonight. But the official stats are, if we look at places like China, and I've picked China and Italy here with the graphs, with the graphs there, because China and Italy are one of the most affected by this. So their numbers are going to be more accurate in some ways. People are asking where the numbers sourced. All numbers are sourced either from the Chinese government or Italian governments. They're official sources. These are not speculative sources. These are what the governments are giving us. People ask me to turn the volume up. I think the volume should be okay now, I'd say. Don't worry about it. But in that graph there, you can see, and I can't actually see it that well, which is a bit annoying. But you can see that when we look at the deaths by age, we can see that this virus, at least from the official statistics, seems to be affecting the very old. Now, I'd like to put a point on this at the beginning, that just because it's the old, that doesn't make it unimportant. Especially in the Western world, on even from a personal level, that we've all got old people, loved ones that we care about, that are vulnerable to this virus, and also on a demographics level, which we'll get into a little bit. And I know Racial Consciousness did a tweet where he specified this, where he was a little bit worried about some people just saying it's old people and there's nothing to worry about. Would you like to add anything to that, Racial Consciousness?
Just as simply as, even if it were only affecting the elderly, those elderly are people's loved ones. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how cold-hearted and detached you have to be to just say, oh, it's only killing old people. Who cares? I mean, that's monstrous. So even if it was, which, we can debate that, but even if it were only affecting the elderly, that's still a tragedy, because those are our elderly. Those are our people who gave us the world that we have and everything we have, every potential and possibility for our own futures. So, we have to care about them. Otherwise, what's the point?
Indeed. And some people are questioning using the official statistics, but the point of using the official statistics is this is what our government's showing us, and the meat of this conversation is going to be their response to it. So the ideas that their statistics could be a lie could be true. But the point is that this is what they're giving us to then justify the means that we're going to go into, justify their actions. So it is important that we look at it from their perspective, especially at this time. Another thing I'd like to add, if you look at some of those graphs, the threat to the elderly there, it is a very large threat to the elderly. And another thing, there is a link in the description to the actual Italian study where they're saying that more than 99% of Italian cases in Italy are not only in, well, there's a high percentage, not 99% of the elderly, but there's also they've normally got one underlying medical illness, at least one. Many have many more. And this is furthered by some people now talking about overlap, as in it's causing a slight bottleneck by people that were were terminally ill and that were predicted to die, say, in 3 or 6 months. And there are links. I'll move to some of those links now. Let's check that out and see if we can get that working to make sure I've got the links up here. Here's some links here, and sorry about this, I've just got to switch to the browser. There you go. In this article here from the BBC News, they specifically talk about this. And there's also a link here, why are so many coronavirus patients died in Italy? And if you look here, it says, according to Prof. Walter Riccardo, scientific advisor to Italy's Minister of Health, the country's mortality rate is far higher due to demographics. The nation has the second oldest population worldwide and the manner in which hospitals record deaths. The age of our patients in hospitals is substantially older. The median is 67, and that is very old in Western world. While in China it was 46. Then he goes on to say, so essentially the age distribution of our patients is squeezed to an older age, and this is a substantial in increasing the lethality. Is lethality a word? I'm just trying to find a bit now where and the second part is this: the way in which we code deaths in our country is very generous, in the sense that all the people who die in the hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus. On re-evaluation by the National Institute of Health, only 12% of death certificates have shown a direct causality from coronavirus, while 88% of patients who have died have at least one pre-morbidity. Many had 2 or 3. Now, the reason I want to emphasize this a little bit here is, as I said earlier, we're looking at this from the perspective of the government's reaction to the virus, to the outbreak. Now, does this mean it is less lethal? Of course not. This means it's particularly targeting the weak. And just to point this out, we had something in the UK. Some of you may not remember this, called MRSA. And that wreaked havoc among hospitals because it was particularly deadly to those that were ill, and it was in our hospitals. This caused a mini epidemic over here where people were going into their hospitals that were very ill to get better and were actually getting far worse, and the death rates obviously increased. So this is not to play down the virus, it's just to try and understand what it is so we can understand their reaction to it. The current deaths at the moment stand worldwide, according to official statistics, stand at nearly 13,000. Cases over 300,000. And as I said earlier, another thing we have to understand with these numbers is that, as you see in those that slide that I put up, I'll put it back up for a second, we can see that most cases, 88% or more, are I don't know if that statistic's up there actually, but anyway, on some statistics we're seeing that most cases, about 88%, are actually mild. We're getting mild symptoms. And people, so when we look at the number of cases worldwide, we have to take into account that many people that are just suffering from a bit of a flu don't even think it's coronavirus, etc., or are self-isolating but don't think it's that bad to deem a visit to the hospital, or not reporting and not getting tests, and other instances tests. Anybody following the news know that there is a massive shortage of tests, so we're not being able to test everybody. So we could probably predict, or many health bodies are predicting, that there's probably a lot more people with the virus that are just not known to them. So that percentage of death rates could change. Every estimate on percentage of death rates at the moment is complete speculation. because we don't know how many people have got it. Just do a little bit of a comparison here, just with the age thing and how particularly deadly it is to the elderly. In the US, for example, we have some stats from the 2017-2018 flu epidemic, which was quite a bad one in the US. And it had a total of 80,000 deaths, US alone, this is. But it affected about 48 million people. And that's just a quick comparison there. But like I say, I'm just getting through these numbers pretty quickly because we want to keep the stream to about an hour and a half. So I don't want to go overboard with the numbers. But it's just to give us a general idea before we move into, like I say, what is going to be the main topic tonight. And that is the government's response and how we should be viewing that response, or ideas on how we should be viewing that response, and what, you know, are the better ways that we could have done this to deal with the virus. And the idea of problem, reaction, solution, and even the government using this pandemic, this virus to get things that they get laws in place that they wouldn't know ordinarily. So the first question would be is, in response to the virus, is the government's response justified? And for this, I'm going to go to the browser. And I'm going to bring up a few articles that me and Racial Consciousness will be able to just go over a little bit. So the first point being, Italian doctors hope for a sign the coronavirus lockdown is working. So we know that in Italy at the moment, there's a nationwide lockdown. Just to explain this a little bit, as some people don't really understand what that is. It's not that everybody's just locked up all day. Going to work is allowed. Essential travel, essentially, it's locked down other than all travel is permitted only if it is essential. So if you can travel to work or travel to the hospitals if you need hospital assistance, etc. Because remember, in this crisis, especially in Italy where their hospitals are overburdened at the moment, people generally, this is going to have a knock-on effect for other medical conditions that need help. There are daily medical, from diabetes, etc. And then going to a hospital could actually put you at a higher risk of infection, especially in Italy where they're overwhelmed. So these are all things that are having a knock-on effect that could bring the tally up in deaths that are not directly caused by coronavirus, but because of what's happening around it, could end up causing complications in other illnesses. There is closure in Italy of all non-essential buildings, non-essential businesses. This is similar. We're going to go through the Italy, UK and US responses. We're taken one by one. They've put drones on the street. There's big fines if you leave, if you are deemed to be essentially traveling non-essentially. Now, before I move into some of these stories, I'll just throw it over to Racial Consciousness, see if he's got anything to add about the numbers, etc. So, hey mate, anything to add there, or you good to go?
No, nothing to add yet. You're going down the right path.
Okay, man, no worries. So if we go to these stories, like I said, the first story is no signs of change, essentially. This story talks about how the lockdown has had no effect at the moment. We can see this recently because I put these notes together a few days ago, but we can see recently with their death rates still going up exponentially at the moment. So they're worried that they may have to take more measures. Just to quote that article there, it said, yesterday we expected to have a change after almost 10 days of this new measure, but it's still rising. So I don't think we can make a prediction today. They're unable to make predictions on if the lockdown is having any net positive effect. Also, another story that's interesting. This pertains to some of the social problems caused by the coronavirus. Now, if I go down to, because this is a bit of an older story, but go down to the protests in Italian prisons, for instance. Upon the release of this coronavirus, there were a lot of people a lot of people in prisons were unhappy with the situations. They're obviously in confined spaces. They're worried about if the coronavirus spreads into their prisons. Confined spaces are, of course, a danger to any, whether it be flu or cold, it doesn't matter. And so there were protests. Actually, 6 people have been killed, inmates, in these protests that were pretty much nationwide across their prison system. Mass riots. Some of the prisons are still not fully under control by the local authorities, meaning that, in fact, 2 of the deaths, I do believe, these in that article, have come from overdoses, because in one prison particularly, they got into the medical supplies. So that there's a bit of chaos going on there. And that's just a little bit of a show of how panic, which is something we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. Once, like I say, I'm just trying to get through some of the information tonight, so we've got something to base, so people don't just think we're talking from nothing when we talk about this. But panic's something we want to talk about tonight, and how panic affects. And this is just a show of panic. When you've got a lot of people in a small confined area that, against their will, in prisons especially, you can get some serious problems. Another problem that we will touch on tonight, and has been predicted for Italy in particular, and I don't have a link here for some reason, but is Italy's economy. Specifically Italy's economy, but it could be a worldwide economic problem from this. But Italy's economy was already on the downturn, and because of this, it's growing exponentially, the predictions for that downturn, from 0.1% downturn predicted to nearly 1% now. So that's a 10 times increase. And these numbers are, of course, speculative, and it's a prediction. Sorry, I don't have a link for that one. Just to get a bit closer to home, because obviously Italy has a severe case of a severe problem with this pandemic at the moment. Just to talk about the UK and the US a little bit. In the UK, we've had the bill, What the Coronavirus Will Do. This coronavirus action plan. And I would like to just make a little statement here. Everybody's just saying coronavirus. It's actually COVID-19. Coronavirus is, the easiest way to think of it is like a genus, although I doubt that's the correct term for a virus, but it's like the genus of others. So SARS, for example, was a coronavirus, and the common cold is a coronavirus. So it's interesting they called the coronavirus bill, because they could be talking about common cold, because they're not stipulating exactly what. But in that bill, just to go through some of the things, it'd be there's some interesting examples here, just of laxing of medical and authoritative law. So where normally it would take 2 doctors to sign off, or 2 government officials to sign off. No, this is not just in medical. This is in procedure, because people will be getting ill, etc. They're going to change that to only 1 signature needed, which obviously brings in corruption, especially in government, where only 1 signature is needed rather than 2. Also, they're getting more powers to close public and private companies. As we've seen in the UK now, when I made these notes, it's actually changed now to the fact that schools have been closed, and bars and restaurants have been closed, although you can still get takeaway, because, you need a pizza with your Netflix, right? And postponement of all elections. Now, this is something the UK have done. I haven't seen a story so far. I've seen a lot of speculation coming out of America, but this is something that could affect the American election if they follow suit with the UK, who are postponing all elections, both local and national. And also, and more scary, I suppose, the powers to detain people for up to 30 days that they say have the virus. And if you refuse to take a test, if they suspect you of having a virus and refuse to take a test, they can also detain you and force test. There's also some things that are attractive to people, such as sick pay amendments, basically bringing sick pay to immediate rather than after 3 days, and also giving a lot of loans, and it's a mixture of loans and grants to companies to deal with this. But remember, loans there as well, so you can get in debt to pay your staff. Although, like I say, there are some grants, but makes it attractive to have the. And just to specify here, you can call in sick and say I'm self-isolating, and that's good enough for them. Okay, there doesn't have to be proof of illness in that case. And just quickly here to move on to America a little bit, we've got an advert up there. Trump invokes Defense Production Act to expand. In the article there, you can see that they're doing this to make more masks, although most masks are made in China. But this act here, I'm not going to go into massive detail with it, but it basically allows the government to take over private sector production. And essentially, like in World War One and World War Two, where in the UK, I know at least, and I believe so in the US, you can correct me if I'm wrong, their racial consciousness, but the government took over the factories, etc., to make what they wanted rather than producing their normal fare. So a company that may be making, bicycle helmets could make war helmets. Well, that's a bit of a silly one for World War Two. If there's anything, I'll just pass over racial consciousness, just in case anything wants to pinpoint upon what I've already said, but we're going to get into it, I say, in a minute anyway.
Yeah, if you're already heading somewhere, we'll go there then, before I say anything.
I'm just going over what I'm doing now. Just tell people is just go over some of the stories, just so we can see some of the responses to what's happening in government. There we can see that the Pentagon mobilises 1,500 National Guard troops to help battle coronavirus. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, these are some interesting ones, and I know racial consciousness has a lot to say about this, but Philadelphia police to stop arrests for non-violent crimes amid coronavirus, which will lead to a few discussions in a bit. But yeah, basically... And this is not the only police department to do this. I've lost track of how many are doing things like this now. At least 2 when I checked this the other day, but I think it's expanding and rolling out to more and more areas in the US. What else is there? Also another thing that I know racial consciousness has a bit to say on is... in Champaign, Illinois, in California, I believe Fresno at least. This is from Champaign, Illinois. The city proposes a grant of extraordinary powers to the mayor, which include violating parts of the Open Meetings Act, which has already been done. I believe they've already reduced it to about 9 now in certain places. Ban the sale of firearms and ammunition. Now, when you add that one with what we just discussed about by catch and release, we've got some maybe a bit of a problem being created by the reaction. Ban the sale of any alcohol, closing of all bars, etc., similar to the UK. Ban the sale or giving away of gasoline or other liquid, flammable or combustible products in any container. So banning the sale of gasoline, so you can't move. Direct the shut-off of power. So they can shut power off. This is the powers that they will be granted with such actions. Take possession of private property. Prohibit or restrict ingress and egress to and from the city. So restrict the movements. Now, these stories are obviously, we're getting to discussion now, but these stories are obviously similar across the world at the moment. As I said there, some of the things that we were reading there were identical to the things in the UK bill. So we can kind of expect... if one country does it, it's going to maybe roll down to another country. So what we want to discuss tonight mostly is, are these measures justified? Are they effective even? And what happens if we give these powers to governments? We could just for a second look at better ways. I know me and racial consciousness have talked about this before, but I mean... a better way to have dealt with this right at the start would have just been to, as we know with all pandemics, it doesn't matter what kind of virus it is, you lock down as close to patient zero, as they call it, as possible. Well, patient zero in this case was actually a country. It was China where it started. So it could have been very easy for the US government, especially the US government with its power, to say, were banning all travel from China as soon as they worked out that this could be potentially hazardous, and banned all travel from anybody else that was allowing travel from China. I know you've. What do you think of that racial consciousness? I mean, is that as a simple solution right at the beginning there, out the bat, which would mean we wouldn't have had to have all these lockdowns and all these laws?
If we were dealing with legitimate governments, they would have taken note immediately upon the discovery of a new virus anywhere in the world, and then would have limited travel immediately. Especially if you don't know how potentially dangerous that virus is, if our governments wanted to stop all of this, they could have done so in November when the first reported cases were coming out. Ban all flights in and out of China. It would have been very simple. And then they wouldn't have had to gone to any of these other measures that we're seeing now. We wouldn't have seen. We wouldn't be seeing them having the ability to limit our movement and limit our ability to purchase products. And this is where it starts to get scary. When they're telling you, like, you're not allowed to purchase gasoline, obviously, because they don't want you to go anywhere.
Yeah.
They don't want you to purchase, in America here, obviously, this one's more of a big deal for us, ammunition and firearms, which is really concerning because here, I mean, to us, that's a staple way of defending yourself, especially if we're anticipating some type of social unrest, which obviously they're anticipating. But again, if our government didn't want to start enacting all of these new bills and all these things, they would have just nipped it in the bud right away and canceled all flights as soon as the first patients were discovered with this virus. But they didn't. And that leads you to believe that perhaps they wanted this to travel and they wanted it to become a problem, because what happens is when there is a problem this big, it creates a state of panic. And when the average person panics, they call upon the government for help. Mm-hmm. And in this country, at least, I mean, I think it's all throughout Europe now, but at least in America, at least, we have precedents of when the American citizens ask the government for help, the government does help, but they take a hell of a lot more than what you were asking them to take, and they never give it back. And I think that's the big problem that we're seeing, is that we're going, in these situations, we are going to give away a lot of our freedoms and a lot of our liberties, and we're going to have no one to blame but ourselves because we're the ones who demanded this. And just like after 9/11, the first thing that happened in America was the Patriot Act. You guys all know the deal with that. It gave the government free rein to spy on whoever they wanted. They didn't need warrants. And what did they end up doing with that? They didn't use it to go after the people that they told us they were going after. They ended up using it to spy on American citizens, particularly what you would generally call white nationalists. And they used that to spy on us, to then try to lump us up, to make a case against us, to declare us domestic terrorists, which they've now been doing for at least the last 12 months that I'm aware of.
Yeah, in the UK, I mean, they're great points, because in the UK we had not with the Patriot Act, we had a similar type of scenario where there was a hate preacher, as he was called back then, a Muslim. He was going to a park and he was spreading hate, basically saying, I hope the UK citizen, the UK soldiers die, etc. And saying all this, fanatical stuff. And there was public outrage. People all over the nation were like, this should be banned. This needs to be made illegal. And there is where we got our hate speech rules, which are now being used to lock up people. For example, I'll give you an example of who it's being used to lock up. There was a guy that after a terrorist attack in Manchester, basically went onto Twitter and said he offered prayers to the victims, and then said, I'm fed up of these Muslims, etc. Said something about I don't know, I forgot his exact wording, but he said something that wasn't too good, and he got 2 years in jail. So, and what I was at the time, I found even in nationalist circles, they were saying we need to ban this speech. This type of speech is bad. So, nationalists demanded the rules that were going to be used against them later. That's just to reiterate your point there of how the Patriot Act, just for the UK audience, if you get me, so they can relate it to something. But like I say, the same there we saw with that. They create, and we've got to understand here as well that there is a bit of problem reaction solution. Even if we ignore the virus, when we see there the catch and release, for example. So in that story, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, because I know you've looked at this a little bit more than me probably, but is it burglaries too that they were saying that could be caught by the police and then released?
It's a little different per city,
Yeah.
but a lot of cities are enacting it. And yes, it's anything, any type of theft of property, be it from a private citizen or from an established business, so long it was done in a non-violent manner, they're essentially green lighting criminal activity.
Yeah. And then if you add that to the fact that then people are going to defend themselves, and in a crisis, we know what happens in some of these areas. We only have to look to, I forgot the city now. Was it, what was the city that had some big riots where people were killed, dragged out of their car? Right, in America a few years ago now. I forgot the exact city.
Like during the election? Like
Yeah.
during the campaign? Well, I know that in Milwaukee, I mean, there was a whole neighborhood that was being lit up, and as it was burning down, traffic was stopped, and there were groups of blacks running around, distinctly saying that they're looking for any stopped car they had that had white people in it.
Yeah, I remember seeing the pictures of that. I mean, it was quite scary. It was, so if they're going to catch and release the criminals, so if you're looting, they're going to be essentially saying, as long as it's non-violent, right?
They're not going to stop with businesses. They're going to come for homes.
Of course,
and then,
it's going to escalate.
Yeah,
we had similar here with the London riots, actually, where literally gangs of Afro-Caribbeans were going through the streets, literally just smashing everything up, attacking people in the street. It was chaos.
Well, that type of behavior creates a frenzy. I mean, imagine, like, again, they're green lighting looting, so they're not going to arrest people for this. So they're now making this an activity. Well, these people are going to get very excited doing this, and they're going to get all riled up on it. And so it's not just going to stop with, well, I'm going to break into this place and steal a pair of shoes. I mean, they're going to go from place to place just causing mayhem for fun because they know they can get away with it. And that's why I don't understand how decriminalizing criminal activity is supposed to somehow combat the spread of this virus. Like, it's not making any sense to me at all.
Yeah, that's the point here. When we look at reasonable measures, we're not saying the government should do nothing. Of course, there's something happening and they should, but we have to look at what they're doing and see if these are reasonable. Yeah, these are even effective. And as you say in this, how is that effective by limiting the sales? Well, that means that they're predicting problems, right? And they don't want you to have. I mean, they don't want American citizens. I mean, it's not an issue here in the UK because we don't have those rights. They don't want you to have ammunition, but we have here a situation where we get problem reaction solution. They're allowing criminals off the hook, so that's going to encourage criminality. If you think you're not going to get any problems from doing a crime, then of course there's no consequence to the crime, and for those types of people, they're going to do the crime, which is then going to do a pushback by law-abiding citizens defending their businesses or homes are going to then start taking the matter into their own hands to defend themselves. Well, then they get perfect, as we saw with the possibly bringing in military there. Then they've got a perfect excuse to bring in military, right? There's rioting everywhere. There's people taking the law into their own hands. Therefore, they can bring in martial law, etc. I mean, that is a concern, right?
It's almost mathematical.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the only logical conclusion. When you decriminalize blatantly criminal activity that we've seen in the past, I mean, we have decades of precedents of what happens once places get looted, even when it's not decriminalized. We see what happens. I mean, these people get into a frenzy, and that frenzy becomes very violent. In almost every case, there are deaths. And so what's going to happen? There's going to have to be a reaction to that violence. And of course, the end result of all of it, again, is the government having more of an excuse to step in. And this time with putting boots on, on homeland soil, which is never good.
No. Uh, whatever the reason, legitimate or not, it's still a bad sign because it means that there's serious problems. But like I said, we're trying to emphasize here, as racial consciousness said there, this is almost mathematical. When you allow, and especially, I mean, if you condense that to this situation, in some of these communities where rioting is going to be more expected, these people likely to have shopped ahead and have so they're going to be even more incentivized to loot and rob if they have no food, right? If they haven't prepared and they've spent their money on other things like drugs, or you know what I mean. So they're going to have even more incentive to do it than say in a presidential election where they're just unhappy and want some Cheetos, you know. So that's so, and that, like I said, that's where we want to look at this. And like we said, with the UK government, that bill is enacted for 2 years, and this is, I know, something that racial consciousness wants to talk about too. When they take some of these laws, now I don't expect them to decriminalise certain things for long periods of time, but there will be some leftover effect of these laws. Whatever laws they bring in, they're not going to easily relinquish, as you said with the Patriot Act. So it's something that we've really got to look at. And if there were, you're playing devil's advocate here a little bit, if there were some large-scale rioting and large-scale a vigilante response to that, how could that affect for example, the banning of guns arguments? What do you think on that, racial consciousness? That, you know, it could cause an event that could even further push to ban guns or limit guns, or there's lots of things that go around this.
Yeah, they get away with chipping away at the Second Amendment here every single year. And they do it because they'll take any random incident where a gun was involved. They obviously won't give the public all the details which led to whatever the incident was, where somebody discharged a firearm and somebody was neutralized with a firearm. But what they'll do is they'll just say, well, see, clearly a firearm was used and we now have a dead person.
Yeah.
So therefore, take away guns. Well, imagine how much more ammunition, no pun intended, but imagine how much more ammunition these lawmakers are going to have when they're putting scenes of violent riots on TV, and they're saying, "Oh my God, look at this chaos! Look at this chaos!" Even though they created the chaos.
Yeah.
But they're going to use that and say, "Look, this is the perfect excuse. We not only have to ban the sales of guns and ammunition, now we've got to start coming and collecting them from people who have them, because this is clearly getting out of hand." And again, there are going to be average people who do see that on TV, and they're going to go, "You know what? You're right." I mean, when you get, average middle class Americans start hearing gunshots in their own neighborhood, I'd be willing to bet that a fair number of them are going to stop worrying about their right to own firearms and start being more concerned about taking those firearms away so that they don't hear shots in their own neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
And that's that power of panic that we've been talking about. When people panic, they tend not to think with their own mind. They tend to want somebody else to handle the situation because they just don't know what to do about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I said, this is something I wanted to point out too. When people are in a panic state, I mean, you can just imagine this from a very basic survivalist situation. Say you were stuck somewhere or there was a problem. If you allow panic to set in, or one person is pulling their hair out with panic and running around like a crazy person, it's the end of the world, we're all doomed, it's all over. You do not listen to that person for sound advice on what to do. I covered this a little bit when I talked on the Mimmir's Brother channel, when I talked about the nature of belief, and I brought up that example of a ship went down and 2 life rafts were available on the ship, and they split the crew into two segments, one with the first mate and one with the captain. the captain's ship, he'd panicked, lost hope, and didn't care. And whereas the second mate, the first mate, sorry, who was in control of the second lifeboat, he got people doing menial tasks. Now I brought that up in belief there, but it's the same instance here. The guy that the captain that had lost hope and panicked, he actually died and his crew on his life raft were very ill. The other guy that hadn't panicked, kept calm, was nothing wrong with him or his crew. So that's why you don't listen to the guy panicking, because he's going to bring the whole situation down. You need to take a level head and a level stance here. And this is why we brought up all the statistics at the beginning. I mean, I know it was only short because we don't want to be here for 3 hours, 4 hours talking about this. So we need to just get through them. And I encourage everybody to look at the statistics themselves, rather than just looking at, like, here's a video of somebody panicking, here's the news telling you just to panic. Try and get the actual data and look at it. And then you can better assess the situation from every angle. Because, as we brought up a couple of times here, the last thing we want to be doing is tying the noose around our own neck, right? We don't want to, through panic, allow our governments to have something. And like I said at the very beginning of this show, for nationalists in particular, and people like myself, who is an ethnic nationalist, ethnic nationalists are clearly under attack. I mean, through governments to media. We are being portrayed as the absolute demon here in the modern world, just because we believe that ethnic nationalism is a solution to globalism, is a solution to the problems that are on our streets. It's not that we hate everybody else. We think that a society born of the same, a society born out of the same ethnicity will operate better. And this is easily seen when you look back in time at communities in the West compared to now, and you look at crime rates. So when we have a government that is hostile to the ethnic majorities, we have to be very careful about what laws we hand over to them. Are there any other things you want to bring up just on the smaller scale stuff, like here with ammo and that is more pertaining to the US than it would be necessarily here in the UK? Because obviously, like I say, we've already lost a lot of those rights you guys have got. You can own firearms in a very, very, you've got to go through a lot of loopholes, and then you're very limited.
I can't think of covering any of these smaller specifics pertaining to law and rights and freedoms and things, but more importantly, just philosophically, the concept of panic. There's literally zero applicable time to panic. It serves nothing on an individual level or on a mass level. No matter what's going on, panic is never an option, and it shouldn't be an option. I mean, it's when you're the most vulnerable, and you make yourself vulnerable when you're in a state of panic. And we're seeing that now, because no matter where you look, there's 101 different conspiracy theories roaming around as to what's actually going on. And again, and none of them are good. And I think everybody's justifiable. Everybody's justifiable in being suspicious of what's going on. Whether you want to believe the virus is even real, or whether you believe it's even deadly, whether you believe it's even more deadly than they're saying. I would say right now you're probably justified in being suspicious of any information you're being given by the mainstream.
I'd agree. Yeah.
So that's something that obviously we can't really form any conclusions on. And so we have to look at our own personal sphere of control. Where do we have control in all of this?
Yeah.
Because obviously whatever is taking place behind the smokescreen of all of this, because I'm personally convinced that the powers that be are going to exploit the hell out of this event. And so obviously that's not going to be to our benefit. It's going to be to our detriment. But I'm not going to pretend that I know what they're doing. I'm not. So all I can focus on is where do I have control, and where do you as an individual have control? We don't have control over what they're going to do. They're going to get away with whatever it is they're doing. We have to understand that. And basically, all we can do is prepare ourselves mentally, physically, and even spiritually to a sense to just endure it and then to get through it once we see it unfolding and make it through to the other side. Because right now, it really is speculation. I mean, this is
Yeah.
confusion like I've never seen before. I mean, things were not this confused even after 9/11.
No. No, that's a big point. Like I say at the beginning of the show, it's kind of surreal. I always try to trust first my own senses, what I can see and hear, and this is why it's surreal. You're getting mass panic, and there's. It's not like the movies. Let's put it that way. You know, when you see a pandemic on the movies, right? There's people. It seems like it's all normal, but it's not, and it's getting scary as they're forcing isolations, etc. And like I say at the beginning, I forgot to mention this, but I mean another way that we could have dealt with it better, given the target population that's vulnerable at risk. And I've seen, I know you've probably seen these too, is pictures of old people standing at empty shelves, and it just shows the breakdown of absolute community. That we're so in it for ourselves. But before we get to that, I'd just like to re-emphasize your point there about agency. How you can react and what you can do in a situation. And that is always important, to take control of what you can take control of. But I'd like to just talk a little bit about community now. Just go into that, just touch on it a little bit, because it is something that is concerning. And as ethnic nationalists, as people that myself, and I know Racial Consciousness because of his tweets, we have a genuine love for our folk. We don't want them to be harmed, and we want them to live how they should be able to live. And it is worrying when we're seeing. I know there's lots of videos of immigrant shops overcharging here in the UK, etc. But still, there's pictures of old ladies standing at empty shelves. I know in my local community, which is majority English, way majority English. Because it is like that, there are already places that you can donate food, and local people, under no help from the government, not asking for any assistance from the government, are making deliveries to elderly people. People within the community, no assistance, people like myself, are donating food to these people that are then going out and delivering them. And this is a good counteraction to why we panic and how government gets away with it. We've lost communities, and this is one of the problems with obviously multiculturalism. Communities break down, thus the only person that can help you is the government, because there is no community. Have you got anything to sound that Racial Consciousness?
Yeah, you said it perfectly. I was going to say this entire event, if it's done one thing, it's revealed just how atomized we are, and how much our sense of community and connectedness to one another has just completely been obliterated over the last 3 generations.
Yeah. And community is something that I believe, you can put your thoughts on this, but I believe personally as an ethnic nationalist, is something we should be trying to build. And we need to be showing our love for our folk. I think this is very important, that we need to be helping them. Showing, because while the media is telling everybody that we're the most evil people in the world, if they see us out there delivering food to grandma, and this is not, and I'm not doing this just for a good image, but we need to back up our words of love, if that makes sense. It's easy to say I love my folk if you don't have to get off your arse and do anything. Part of my French there.
When I was first brought into this greater pro-white community, I was brought in by a guy who'd been in it since the 40s or 50s, and I came in with the same attitude that everybody else said, all the other young people, and they said the same thing. I would gladly die for this, right? And he sat there and he said, well, that's great, and I believe you. He goes, but are you willing to work for it? And of course, it was something that I never thought, okay, well, what does that look like? And yeah, while we have this with what we do on social media is not necessarily going to reflect what we do in the real world. Like on social media, we can have a much larger voice, and therefore we should kind of be speaking to more worldly um, aspects of things, like our global community, and that's good on social media. But then we
Yes.
have to, in real life, I mean, what we do may be as small as helping one person. You know, one thing I do that I've been doing for about the last 14 months is I volunteered to take care of an elderly blind man. I mean, he has absolutely no one to take care of him. Initially, I actually tried getting the state to to get him a care worker, but he didn't qualify for state care, and he can't afford private care. And so, after a few weeks of trying to find this guy care, I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
Why? Because I can. I have the time, and because it breaks my heart to watch this guy try to live out his life completely blind with no help. I mean, and he impresses me with what he can do with no vision, but still. So I may not, I may have like a huge voice online, at least in our community. But yeah, the stuff I do in real life, I mean, it's for individuals that I know, and it's like that may be the biggest impact I'll ever have. Like, I have some friends that, um, some married couples that have children, and every once in a while they want some time off, or their daycare can't take them or whatever. I volunteer to babysit their children, and I don't ask for money. I know it's not a huge deal, but to them in that moment it is, and it helps them a lot. So, like I
Yeah.
said,
I tell you what, as a parent that has no help and we homeschool children, I know that if we had somebody around that could help us in that way, you would be surprised at how much of a help that is. Getting a minute to your own with your own thoughts can be a very valuable thing. So it is no this is the point. Sorry to cut you off, and I will let you finish. But
no,
this is
you're
the point.
fine. Go on.
Small actions can mean a hell of a lot to certain people. It doesn't even have to always be a massive action. Something that takes no effort for you but has a massive positive impact on another person. Can be. I mean, even just trying to help struggling businesses in your local area. You're anti-globalism. Well, don't shop at the do you get around it? The people still then go to the big supermarkets, and their little greengrocers down the road is shut. That's not even much of a hassle. Maybe you pay a few extra pennies for your tomatoes, but these are things that we can do. And
Well, for every in like I tried to actually like create a ratio for this because I am that, nerdy. But a long time ago I said, like, what is online content worth compared to real life? And I was just thinking, for every person that you're able to help in real life, that's worth 100,000 likes or retweets on a post.
oh yeah,
Maybe even more, maybe 100 times even that. I mean, when you're actually able to help somebody in real life, I mean, you're having an effect on a life, and you're serving a real purpose. I mean, anybody can say whatever they want online, and anybody can,
yeah,
you can apply whatever value you want to your own online content. But unless it's actually changing people's lives, then it doesn't really have any value. I mean, thought value is good, but unless it's motivating change,
yeah.
and so, like I was saying, even if all it is you're bringing your elderly neighbor his groceries because he just can't get up and drive to the store anymore.
Yeah.
Honestly, you wouldn't even need a social media account. You'd be doing more for the world if that's all you did.
I agree. I mean, I really agree with that. And remember this, when we talk about this, we don't just mean in the times of crisis. We mean all the time. Racial consciousness there shared a story of him, the way he's helping an elderly person that is unable to look after himself. He does this. He didn't do this because of coronavirus. He did it because he loves his folk, and that's the point. And maybe that's something we can gather from this. Maybe we can look at those pictures of those old people bent over double, staring at bare shelves, and maybe it can affect us. Like pictures. I mean, we need things like that to affect us. We need to be doing more. In the real world, because as racial consciousness very well put there, it's what's 100 retweets, 1,000 likes compared to that that you are helping people, and that help to them is worth it's immeasurable. And we are about community. That is what ethnic nationalism is about. It's about that we are one larger community, that we look after each other, we look out for each other, we make sure that we're all okay. And that's what you build a nation around. That shared identity, that shared care, that shared love. That's why you call them, your kin, your kith. And I think that if anything we take out of all of this is our need to do more in the real world. And not everybody wants to talk about big things, like so people want to talk about demonstrations and protests and all of these things, but really we could be doing a lot more for our cause and for our folk by just helping out somebody that can't get to the shop. Very small things. If you want to start a group, why don't you start a group around that? That'll confuse.
That's what.
Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
That's what I was going to say. Is that, if you have two options, building an organization, which everybody wants to build, or building a community, community is going to have much deeper roots and it's going to be a lot stronger. I mean, a whole political entity can't do anything against a tightly bound, loyal community.
No.
I mean, because they rely on people doing what the government says. But honestly, if you have a community that just says, no, we're going to do what our community wants, what's best for our community, then laws, they can make whatever law they want. But if you can get everything you need within your community, you're kind of untouchable. So as much as we do, obviously, we have to participate in politics. And yeah. I firmly believe we do have to start building organizations. Mm-hmm. I believe if we do any one particular thing, especially during this event, because this would be the opportune time to do this, start building community. Get to know your neighbors. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why we don't know everybody who lives on our own block. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that we don't. But no, even if all you had was one whole block, both sides of the street, every house, if you guys knew each other, all trusted each other, all hung out together, that would just be a very strong social unit. Mm-hmm. That it would be much stronger than even an organization that you build online and accept donations for and all of that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like I say, if we look at it in this time right now with the coronavirus, like I live in a majority English, like 98% plus probably area. The local community instantaneously did this. It needed no government infrastructure to do. And this is something that's interesting, even if you go back to the time when the state got involved. The state started to get more involved. I mean, there were times when instead of having new mothers go to this place when they have a child, a government organised run where they're gonna push all of their propaganda, push all of their medicine, whatever. Before they did that, in the UK at least, there would be the women in the area would meet every week and every other day maybe. And when there was a woman that was pregnant with her first child, especially, they would start knitting for her. They would be there. I mean, there are even instances, I mean, I can't go into detail all now because I haven't got it on hand for this show, but there are instances where, these communities would then even give the woman a break. They would go, look, you need a break now. So they would come around, or here's some meals we've prepared because new mothers or people with lots of children need help. But it was the women in that community come out. There was no government help, not at all. What slowly happened to those communities was the government said, here's some money to help you. And eventually, once they got used to the money, like a drug pusher, here's some more money, but you got to do it this way now. Here's some. Do you get what I'm saying? It's slowly till now they're completely government institutions. Nobody does that.
That's kind of how they want it. They want you dependent.
Yeah.
On the system. They want you dependent on government institutions, because that way they have power. They can eliminate your access to income and resources or whatever it may be. They don't want you to be self-sufficient. And I don't want to come across as a libertarian or anything like that, because I detest modern libertarians. But at the same time, when the issue isn't government in general, the issue
No.
is this particular government. And I don't just mean American government. I'm talking about EU, American government, basically for all intents and purposes, the world government that formed after the end of the Second World War. This government has a long precedent of doing things that are not in the people's best interest, and in fact, doing things to the detriment of the people.
Yeah, I mean, with examples of, like you say, government overreach or overstep or getting involved, especially like you say, when we have to put that in there that these governments are hostile to the ethnic majorities in these countries. They're actively silencing and doing actions that are against our interests. Quite clearly with multiculturalism. As I said, you can't build a community through multiculturalism. But when you look at the things I was saying there about the communities that we're building, we're getting a similar thing with this coronavirus actually as well. Like I said earlier with the UK bill, they're making sure that nobody's going to be without their rent. They're making sure that, which are good, and they're saying just take the time off work, self-isolate, that's fine. And we'll pay you. So they're encouraging the isolation. Do you get what I mean? They're encouraging people to take more time off, which, you could argue is a good thing with the virus. But what I'm saying is, it's a lot more encouraging. Do you get what I mean? People generally don't want to go to school. They don't want to go to work. People do jobs they don't like, so they're going to take that biscuit. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's the same as that community of women that were helping new mothers in their area took that money at first because it comes with no strings attached, right? Or looks like it does. But that's something we need to talk about as well. Just as we haven't really talked about it a little bit, and we're gonna have to start wrapping it up soon. But there's a few things we haven't talked about, so we have to get to. But the financial situation after this, given as I said with the numbers and the stats at the beginning, and then looking at it about the reactions of what they're doing with these restrictions, there could very easily be made here the argument that a financial crisis caused from the reaction could even cause more deaths and more problems than the virus itself, right? Racial conscience, you got anything to add there? Sorry.
Oh, I thought that was your normal pause. Usually you say right. That's no, I don't have anything to add.
No, but the financial situation could be very problematic.
Well, I think everything is like, when this first became a thing, obviously you had two lines right down the middle. You had people that were thinking that this was going to be the most serious virus we've ever faced. And then there was other people saying this virus isn't a threat at all. And I'm just like, well, forget about whether the virus is legitimate or not. Understand that the government is already acting on it. Yeah. And so is the populace, and that's causing the people to act. So whether there even is a virus or not, the world is changing.
Yes.
It is going to change. This is not going to go away, and everything's not going to go back to normal. We have to understand that. And so, yes, right now we are going to see a massive restructuring of the financial system. I know we will here in America. We've been pushing more and more towards socialism for a long time. And so I think right now people are honestly at first, I know people who can't go to work right now and they're drawing free money because that's how their system is. And they're actually enjoying the break right now. And understandably, our jobs are shit. But but the thing is that's going to plant a seed in people. Like you said, they're going to start to get addicted to that free money and the free time because a lot of people are going to want the money and not have to go to a job they don't like in order to earn it. So not only is this just restructuring law and then, like I said, the economic system, this is starting to restructure people's expectations of social life in general.
Yeah, another thing to point out with the financial crisis, I know as a small business, as running small businesses, and I'm sure this is true for many as I've looked at some of the statistics on this, your big chains, McDonald's and that, they can weather a storm. Yeah, like this. They can weather it. They got no problems. Small business
like
myself,
actually make money coming out of it.
Yeah.
That's the big corporations will actually profit from crisis.
Yeah. Whereas small businesses like myself, we can't. I'm not. When we don't sell anything, that's it. You know what I mean? There's no. I don't. I don't have. I can't keep throwing money at it because I don't have any. So what I'm saying is, this is going to affect, and this is how as well companies benefit, because what happens when all these small businesses on my high street that are not getting any sales now? What happens when they go down? Then everybody goes to the big supermarket, right, and the big chains. So they end up getting wealthy off it. It's similar to what happened in the 1930s economic crash, where the small banks, there were many small banks, especially in America. It had a very thriving small town bank communities. They were all wiped out by that crisis. Now we only have massive global banks, right? So this is something else that we need to be aware of. And like I say, if we can, help support these if it's possible. Support these small businesses, especially small businesses in your local area, because that's where it's really going to affect you. And we have to be more mindful of that, especially coming out of this crisis, because if our high streets, I mean, in the UK, it's terrible now. Our high streets are dying anyway. This could be a killing blow for many of them. They're already struggling. And that's it. This virus, they can't afford certain things. So it's something else to be made aware of. Now, there's a couple of things I want to get before we go. I mean, unless you've got anything to add there, racial consciousness.
No, go ahead.
Well, I do want to talk. We put out now. I don't mind putting my tinfoil hat on every now and again, because I think some of these things are interesting, to say the least. So we're going to look at it. I'm just trying and get up the right link here. Now, here is an article that says tough measures to stem the coronavirus outbreak could be in place for 18 months, scientists say. But what's actually interesting about this, and I've got the notes here, there's some notable quotes within this where it talks about South Korea. And I'll just read one of those quotes now. South Korea, which in early March had the worst outbreak outside of China, has managed to slow the rate of new infections without introducing lockdown-style measures. Instead, the country carried out testing on a massive scale and aggressively traced patients' contacts by tracking their movements through their credit card transactions and cell phone use, as well as widespread surveillance cameras, enabling them to isolate those who were at risk. A transparent public information campaign also helped risky neighbourhoods. And then they go on to say, a professor of evolution and genomics at the University of Oxford says that aggressive social distancing measures implemented now could buy time for the UK and other countries to buy time to eventually implement high-tech tracking and surveillance measures. So this guy here is talking about it as it's a foregone conclusion there, right? He's saying these measures are going to buy us time to implement high-tech tracking and surveillance measures. Now, I'm not going to go into this on this show too much because I haven't had chance to look through it all myself. But there's a thing here. I'm just going to put this website up, and there is a link in the description called Event 201, and I would like to give it a mention here. And it's relating to that, but we'll get racial consciousness's thoughts on this tracking ideas in a minute. But Event 201 was an event that was carried out a few months before coronavirus was a thing. Coronavirus has been a thing, like I say, the common cold is coronavirus, but it predicted a novel strain of coronavirus, which if you Google novel coronavirus and put news story, you will find that's what they're calling COVID-19 in the mainstream press and officially. But this event is one of those scenario type live events where they get these experts around the world to sit down and deal with an event live. They have fake news broadcasts, etc., etc. Well, in this event, it was tracking a novel coronavirus as it became a pandemic and how they would have to react to that. The link is in the description. You can find it. It's called Event 201. But this, remember, was before, about a month plus before the initial outbreak, before the first case in China. So it's bearing in mind. But like I say, I would like to talk to racial consciousness here just about this idea that of possible tracking. Yeah. That they may have to track our every movement to keep us safe. What do you think of that, racial consciousness?
Well, I think we've all seen this coming. I mean, there's been proposals for this for a long time. I mean, and a lot of people rightly were nervous about this in the late 90s and early 2000s when I started hearing about it.
Yeah, same here.
And so the issue is most people, if you just ask them, hey, do you mind if the government has the ability to know where you are at all times, not just on which street, but even which room and which house you're in? Most people are going to say no. I mean, they're going to say, I'm not okay with that.
Mm-hmm. But
right. And that's what I was going to say. And so once again, we have these events, and that's when all of a sudden it's not even a proposal. They're just going to go ahead and do it. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, these are the things we have to be aware of is, I mean, on the one hand, we have to be concerned about potentially getting sick and dying from some new super virus, whatever it may be.
Yes.
But then on the other hand, we have to worry about, again, these powers that be that are going to exploit the hell out of it in order to do things like
the world that we could create.
Every movement.
The world that we could create out of our fear for safety. I mean, there's the balance, right? You know, where if we create a world where we're monitored, I mean, and just to point out how this could be implemented with some of this, I mean, we've seen all these videos of people mass buying toilet rolls and things, right, at supermarkets, and everybody's unhappy about that. Well, how could you stop that? You know, you could implement, but they could just go to different shops, right? They could just keep going to different shops, buying. Well, not if they had an app or somehow they put a chip in your card, right, that told them how many you'd brought already, wherever you'd brought them, and you couldn't buy anything else. Somebody's bringing up ID 2020, the digital ID. That is something linked to this. But like I say, I don't want to go too much into this, and I may have another show planned with a friend of mine who knows a lot more about this than me, and go into it in a bit more detail, because I'm not as well versed as I should be to talk about this. But I wanted to put it out there and obviously get RC racial consciousness. I'm going to use proper name because it sounds a little bit different in the UK if you say RC.
Oh yeah, that's right. We talked about that. I was going to say RC is fine.
Yeah. This in the UK it means a little bit, but also like here I just had, and also like vaccines and that, and I wanted to mention that before we go as well. Whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine is not the case here. I want to stress that at the beginning. The problem with a vaccine or forced vaccine, what you've got to understand about that is that's called forced medication. That's kind of like Brave New World areas where here, Mr. Racial Consciousness, take your happy pill today. You know, the world's crap, but as long as you got your happy pills, they've talked about this before by putting certain things in the water to literally make us happy.
Well, and the problem with even allowing one time, like say for instance, they were justified this one time in forcing a vaccine.
Yeah.
Again, we have a thing called legal precedence. And once it is set, it is impossible to eliminate from legal record. And so once you have one forced vaccine, then all of our government officials will have that precedence and they'll say, well, why can't we force other vaccines? And even beyond vaccines.
Yeah, medication in general.
Medication. Why can't we force this person that we believe to be clinically depressed, even though they're not doing anything harmful to anyone, but we just feel they're clinically depressed.
Yeah.
We should now force them to take this medication because once again, they have this precedence that they can build off of that forced vaccine.
Oh yeah, so anybody pushing for anything like that within our movement, you really have to. Racial consciousness pretty brilliant there about precedent. You really have to understand that when you talk about forced medication, um, allowing allowing the government, setting that precedent that you're allowed to force medicate. I mean they only have to say racial consciousness. What he puts on his Twitter is madness, right? They've got a precedent now where we can, this is against. And if you watch that event 201 or clips of it, I want to go through it all. They literally talk about wrongthink. They talk about how to silence and arrest people spreading what they say is disinformation. Well, if they get forced medication, they already have these powers if they can class you as mentally ill. The only people that are forced to have forced medication are mentally ill and prisoners. So that's what our societies have always said. Mentally ill because they cannot choose for themselves. They're not mentally equipped to. And prisoners because they no longer have a choice. They forgo that, that choice has been taken away from them because of their actions. So if we have forced medication, are we saying that we're even not educated enough to make decisions? Is that what our governments are saying? Or our governments telling us that we're prisoners to the state? It's something to bear in mind, at least. But I know our racial consciousness also wanted to mention something about prepping here as well. And I've put it here in my own terms, but a racial consciousness we give it here is like essential prepping versus doomsday prepping. And just to preface, I'm a low income family, and so we buy in bulk when we can. We're smart, right? We don't buy just one bit at a time. So we actually always buy in bulk. We buy rice in 10, 20 kilogram bags sometimes. We buy dried foods that can store for long periods of time. Not necessarily in case of a worldwide crisis, but even for our own individual crisis. We don't have enough money that week. Well, we've got rice and beans. We can at least live. Yeah, it's not going to be the most extravagant meals, but we can afford to eat because we have those in place. And I believe that is essential. Everybody should have that level, a small level that they can survive for a month on very basic food, even for own personal cases. And then there's the doomsday preppers that have everything. And I take my hats off to them. They have everything. But something I'd like to just put out there is in World War II, if you were hoarding, in matters of a crisis, the government will, as we've seen earlier, could take the right to say, you've got loads of stuff that we want. It's illegal for you to have it. They did that in World War II in the UK. I don't know if they did it in the US. But because we were in a ration situation, as soon as they brought rations in, hoarding was illegal. But punishable by jail time. But I know that racial consciousness wants to add some of his own thoughts on prepping.
You pretty much covered it. There's common sense prepping, and then there's excessive or extreme prepping. Every human being has an obligation to make sure that he's prepared to weather a storm. I mean, figuratively and literally. You don't have to wait for a doomsday event in order to require extra supplies. I know we had a crazy event here in the Midwest where I'm from. I have some friends that live further south than me in Illinois. They experienced an inland hurricane in 2006 or 2007. Mm-hmm. It was a catastrophic event. It was an event that had never happened before. And they ended up going without power for 2 weeks. Now, that was something that the majority, when I had gone down there and I'd actually seen the destruction, almost nobody I talked to was prepared for that. Yeah. I mean, most people, when they hear the term, to prep or prepping, they imagine, the weirdo in the concrete bunker with a bunch of backpacks. Like, they don't understand that prepping literally just means having enough food and water to last you a month or 3 months, or, it doesn't have to be a bunch of freeze-dried stuff. I mean, it can just be normal food, whatever it is you would eat regularly. Just buy that extra every time. I mean, I know myself.
Tinned foods, for example.
Well, for the last 15 years, I mean, oatmeal is a huge part of my diet. I don't particularly like going to the grocery store. So when I am out, I tend to buy the things that I know I'm going to eat, that I eat every day or at least several times a week. I just buy a lot of it.
Yeah.
So on any given day, I have like 6 months worth of oatmeal in my cupboards, and it's not that much. I mean, it's just six
Yeah.
of those tubes, the big tubes, and they cost like $1.50. So that's not an extreme thing when you
No.
look at it in terms of price and even shelf space.
Well,
So that's 6 months worth of that.
yeah. I mean, another thing like low income is more of a reason to do it as well. Like say, I'm low income. When I buy 10 kilograms of rice, it's a lot cheaper than buying it kilogram by kilogram. So it's like a kind of common sense thing to do anyway, to try to buy bulk where you can. And people say, well, on a low income, it's hard. We had to when we first started to buy bulk because we knew it made economic sense and we were on a low income. We had to go for a month without any, we went hard for a month so we could save up to get the bulk. Do you get what I'm saying? Because then it was going to save us money and free up more of our money. So it's actually a logical thing to do from a low income perspective.
It makes more sense when you're
Yeah.
low income. That's why I started doing it. Was
Yeah.
I was in extreme poverty and I was like, I can't afford to go to the grocery store every week. So I tried only having to spend money on groceries once a month or once every other month if I could.
And like you say as well, it's not just food. I mean, for me, it's not too bad. I make sure I'm stocked up with gas bottles and for my camper fire because I go camping a lot. So, but I always make sure that there's a large stock there, so I can. But in an emergency situation, I can. And we do have an open fire, so we could use that as well to boil water, etc. So there are implemented places in there where we could, if the power went out, and like you say, it was something we didn't mention tonight, which was a good example for how government take laws. And I know you had something to say on this when I talked about you privately. Hurricane Katrina and what happened there. You'll know more about that, but just to emphasize what we're talking about tonight, not just with survival, but with the government. I mean, do you want to add anything about that? Because that's such a big event where we can see a crisis situation unfold.
I probably don't know more about it than anybody else. Anybody in the chat here, they
Mm-hmm.
were listening even, they probably know. But yeah, we know the stories that as soon as that event was well underway, we had um, law enforcement officers storming into people's homes and taking their guns. And
Yeah.
they weren't even rescuing these people from the floods. They were just going in there and taking firearms from homes that they knew to have them. And again, to this day, I don't think that they've ever come up with any justified reason for doing so. And I don't even know that anybody's been punished for it. I mean, I don't even know if those firearms were ever returned to their owners. So again,
Yeah, it's
yeah, it's. But I was gonna one last thing on the
yeah,
prepping.
yeah. Go for it.
It's as an individual, you have the obligation to uh, protect yourself, not just from immediate threats, but from threats that haven't arisen yet. And so the same as a family, as a family man, you have an obligation to defend your family. That doesn't just mean defending them in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
It means defending them from whatever it is that may come, whether that's, an event like this or a natural disaster or whatever.
Yeah,
So prepping doesn't just mean some stereotypical image of
yeah, yeah,
some guy who's really into weird survival gadgets. It
yeah,
just literally means being able to feed and clothe your family during times like this, where we're going out and getting the supplies we need has now been disrupted.
yeah.
So anticipation of disaster
And
is
personal
part of.
disaster, like I say, just personal hardship can.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say I can chime in just a little on that. A lot of you guys
Mm-hmm.
know I was homeless for over 2 years, and part of that was because an illness popped up out of nowhere. I mean, it was something that none of my doctors had seen coming. I was completely not prepared for it, and yeah, I mean, it took almost 4 years of battling it before I was ended up being homeless. But yeah, I mean, stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
Nobody saw this coming. It was an event that I couldn't have predicted. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
thought I was in the best health that I'd ever been in. And then all of a sudden I was leveled, by this condition. So you have to be prepared for things that you're not even aware are
A
possible
possibility. Yeah.
dangers. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's and with your story, obviously, it makes even more sense. It shows that I mean, it does happen. People get in situations that can change overnight. I mean, look at when people lost their houses. I mean, this is this is one of the problems with a possible financial crisis, right? It could have a knock-on effect where people find themselves homeless or what, in real and can't afford medical, etc., etc. Do you know? There's a knock-on effect here that could be much grander. And like I say, we won't go too much into any more of this tracking, etc., because I might be able to do a show later on where I can go really in depth on that. And we're pretty much running out of time now, so I just wanted to finish up with some things that maybe we can use here to use the situation to our advantage, maybe on small personal levels. It's springtime, for instance. A garden is a great defense against starvation. Being able to grow your own food, again, as we was talking about, government dependency, taking dependency away from the big supermarkets. Yeah, that you can grow some of your own food. So if you don't know much about it and you are stuck in your house at the moment with nowhere to go and nobody to see, maybe take some time to learn a bit about gardening, or get out into your garden a little bit and do some digging and messing around. Obvious ones: spend time with family, your children, loved ones, especially if you've got time off work because of it. Sometimes we can just take. Obviously, it's not a great situation, and it could have massive problems down the line. But we're still alive now, and we're still enjoying life, and we should try to enjoy it, especially when we get a chance to. Especially like for me, spending time with my children and my family when I don't have to do other things is really great. And in our busy, hectic lives, trying to make money, trying to survive, these things can be neglected. So if you get a little breather, try and do that. But if there's anything you want to add like that, racial consciousness, or any point throughout the night that we've talked about here, throughout the stream, that you want to reiterate, that you think is especially important for people leaving this show to come away with, please say so.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the point that I made earlier about whatever's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what it is. We can't pretend that we know exactly what it is. And we have to understand that it is happening and that it is going to happen. We can't stop it. I mean, you're talking about atomized hyper individuals with no sense of organization or anything like that, versus a massive governmental entity that has all the power in the world and generation upon generation of organization and leadership and everything like that. So they're going to get done what they want to get done. But how we move through this is what's most important. So when you can't control your environment, what you can control is how you respond to it. So obviously panic is not an option. Panic makes no sense. It solves nothing, and it only creates more problems. In everything that we do, we want to be solution oriented. And sometimes, the solution is to do nothing, but keep your eyes and your ears open for a time where you see something that should be done. Right now, part of that is make friends in real life. I mean this. You have to have friends and support in real life. You can have as many friends as you want online. It's meaningless if the power goes out, if internet goes out. Yeah, even if it doesn't, if something's happening right outside your door, you need friends. You need community. And so now's the time to really start putting emphasis on that, because the only way that people survive world-changing catastrophic events is through communities, because no man can survive anything by himself. And life would kind of be meaningless if you did. I mean, I don't know what the point of it would be. We're a community species by nature, by our own biological design. We're hardwired not only to be in a community, but to literally need it. We need community. So start working on stuff like that. Like Phil just said, the gardening thing is great. I think it's a great idea. Spring is coming. If we have no idea how long this whole social distancing is going to be, or what it's going to manifest into, it could turn into full-blown quarantine. We don't know. But if you have access to a backyard, a front yard, I mean, even like window box gardens, stuff like that, if you can do it, tinker around with it, experiment with it. I mean, it'd be healthy, even if it's a failure. It's just something healthy to do. But then beyond that, make friends. I mean, if you've got one trusted friend in real life that you know you can trust and depend on, that's worth 1,000 followers online.
Yeah, possibly more. To be honest, I mean,
10,000, yeah,
yeah.
100,000. Yeah.
No, I think you summed up the end there great, and I think you reiterated the important points of what we talked over tonight. So I'd like to thank you for joining me tonight, Racial Consciousness. It's been a pleasure and an honour as always to speak with you. We do speak often here and there, so
Yeah, no, you're most welcome, and I'm happy to be here. A little nervous at first, man.
yeah,
I don't particularly talk just for the sake of hearing my own voice. So
yeah.
doing live streams is definitely not something I'm going to make a habit of, but I'm definitely glad to be here for you, brother.
Well, if you ever do want to, if you ever have anything you want to say, obviously the door's always open here. You know that.
I'll leave it up to the audience. If they insist I do more, then I guess maybe we could make a small habit of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some interesting topics we could cover because this is a bit outside of both of our normal view, but we just thought it was very important to talk about, and that's why we decided to do it. But yeah, we could probably talk about something more within our field of expertise, if you will, for a future one. But anyway, as I say, thanks again, and thanks to everybody listening. As always, I really appreciate people tuning in because otherwise there'd be no point us doing this at all. It would waste my time. So thanks for everybody listening, and please make sure I'm going to leave this up everywhere, and it will be up on BitChute and Libri later as well today. So please share it around. And again, thanks for being here. Good night.